$10 million, one man, one moment that could either save or sell out working Americans. Imagine it. Behind the closed doors of power, where deals are made and destinies are rewritten, J.D. Vance stood face to face with Gretchen Whitmer. The lights of Washington, D.C. flickered outside as a silent storm raged within. A single envelope, thick with promises and betrayal, lay between them, and the future of thousands of families hung in the balance. Would you take the money? Would you trade your voice for their silence? As the clock ticked and the stakes rose higher, one decision would expose more than corruption. It would reveal the true cost of conscience in modern America. Tonight, we take you deep inside a dramatized retelling of this confrontation, a story crafted from the whispers, headlines, and tensions that shape our nation. While this narrative is fictional, the emotions are real. The struggle for integrity, the fight for working families, and the courage to say no when the price of silence is too high, those truths belong to all of us. So lean in, because in the next few moments, you'll witness how $10 million failed to buy one man's soul, and how his choice lit a fire across the country. Stay with us, because what happens next will challenge what you believe about power, money, and courage. The chandelier above the grand ballroom of the Hay Adams Hotel glittered like 1,000 captured stars. Beneath it, power mingled with wealth, wrapped in tailored suits and designer gowns. The marble floor reflected it all. The polished shoes of senators, the subtle gold accents on the champagne flutes, the practiced smiles of those used to making decisions that shaped millions of lives. J.D. Vance stood near a towering column, his posture straight, his face calm, but his mind was alert, watching the room as if it were a chessboard. The soft clink of glasses mixed with the low murmur of conversations about trade, alliances, and backroom deals. Somewhere a quartet played a waltz, but their music felt distant, almost irrelevant against the weight of the night. And then came Gretchen Whitmer. She moved through the crowd like a shadow, graceful, unhurried, but with purpose. People stepped aside without realizing why. The soft lighting caught the glint of a thin bracelet at her wrist and the steely glint in her eyes. She didn't smile as she approached J.D. She didn't need to. "Congressman Vance," she said, her voice smooth as silk but laced with iron. "I think we should have a word, in private." Without waiting for his response, she gestured toward the balcony, a terrace that overlooked the Washington skyline, where the monuments stood lit like silent witnesses. J.D. hesitated for a breath. He could feel eyes on them, allies, rivals, reporters. But he followed. He had to. Outside, the air was crisp, carrying with it the hum of a city that never truly slept. Far below, headlights traced rivers of light through the streets. For a moment, there was only the city and the night. And then Whitmer turned, pulling from her small clutch an envelope. It wasn't large, but the weight it carried felt enormous, as if it could tip the balance of everything. She held it between them, her gaze steady. "This is just between us. 10 million, J.D. Think about your family." The words hung there, more dangerous than any threat. 10 million. The figure echoed in his mind. Enough to change his children's future. Enough to bury debts, to secure comfort for generations. Enough to wash away doubts. Or so she thought. J.D. stared at the envelope but didn't reach for it. His eyes lifted to hers, and for the briefest moment, he saw not the polished governor, not the strategist, but the raw hunger for control, the certainty that everyone had a price. And then his mind shifted. The glittering city, the clinking glasses, the power games, it all faded. In their place rose an image burned into his memory, his father's boots, scuffed, cracked at the sides, the soles nearly worn through from years at the factory. Boots that had trudged through snow to the night shift. Boots that stood in unemployment lines after the plant closed, when the jobs had been shipped overseas in another deal made on nights like this. 10 million. The number was meant to dazzle, but to J.D. it felt like the weight of every broken promise made to working Americans. Whitmer's voice softened, but it was no less deadly. "No one needs to know. You walk away quietly. This all stays in the dark. You're too smart to make enemies over this." And in that moment, that breath between choices, J.D. Vance felt it, the invisible line drawn across his soul. One side, security, comfort, ease. The other, truth and a storm he might not survive. What would he choose? And what storm would he unleash if he refused? Inside, the music swelled, the gala unaware that out here on the balcony, a nation's future was balancing on the edge of a single decision. The envelope hovered between them, as if it contained not just money, but a choice heavy enough to bend the night itself. J.D. Vance didn't take it, not right away. His hand hovered near it, not from temptation, but from the gravity of what it symbolized. His fingers brushed the paper. Thick, high quality, expensive even in its feel. And in that instant, it seemed the world slowed. The murmur of the gala inside became a dull hum. The cold air of the night seemed to sharpen. He felt the weight of it, far beyond the paper and ink. $10 million, 10 million reasons to walk away. 10 million chances to abandon everything he had claimed to believe. And then, like storm clouds rolling over memory, the past came rushing in. He was no longer on that balcony. He was a boy again, small and unsure, standing in the doorway of a kitchen that smelled of burned coffee and despair. His father sat at the table, boots caked in mud and grease from the last shift he would ever work. The radio droned on with the news of another plant closure. JD's mother stood at the counter, her back to them, shoulders trembling. She wiped at her face, but the tears kept falling. The factory had been the town's lifeblood, and now it was gone. Sold, outsourced, gutted by a deal made in a room not unlike the one JD stood in now. His father didn't speak. He didn't have to. It was his silence that broke JD's heart most. A silence filled with humiliation, with the knowledge that no hard work could have saved him. And then his mother turned, voice low but fierce, tears streaking her cheeks as she looked at JD. "Don't ever let anyone put a price on your voice." The words echoed through him now, as if the wind itself carried them back across the years. He blinked, and the memory faded, but its weight remained. JD looked down at the envelope once more. And this time, it was not an offer. It was an insult. It was everything that had stolen hope from families like his own. He lifted his eyes to Gretchen Whitmer's, steady and unflinching. His voice came quiet, but there was steel beneath it. "No, just that. One word, but it held the force of a storm refusing to break. For a heartbeat, she didn't move. Then she smiled. Not the smile of someone defeated, but the smile of someone who had expected this, who had planned for it. A smile that promised the battle was only beginning. The lights of the city glinted in her eyes, cold and sharp as a blade. "I admire your principles, JD," she said, soft enough that only he could hear. "But principles don't win wars, and you've just declared one." The envelope remained in his hand for a second longer before JD placed it back between them, as if it burned. He turned toward the door leading back inside, the warmth and noise of the gala now a distant, hollow echo compared to the storm that had just begun to gather around him. And as he stepped forward, he felt it. The invisible weight of the choice he'd made, heavier than any money, heavier than any threat. The night was no longer just a night of power. It had become the opening act of a reckoning. The door to the gala closed behind him with a soft click, but its echo followed J.D. Vance into the night like a warning. The city stretched before him, washed in the silver glow of streetlights blurred by the drizzle now thickening into rain. J.D. slid into his car, the leather seat cold against his back, the weight of the evening pressing into his chest. He didn't start the engine right away. His hands gripped the steering wheel as he stared through the windshield, watching the rain bead and race down the glass. Somewhere out there, beneath those lights and beyond those streets, the storm he had just summoned was beginning to stir. When he finally turned the key, the car's engine hummed to life, a small comfort against the growing dread in his gut. He pulled away from the curb, tires whispering over wet pavement. The city's monuments passed in shadowed silence, the gleaming white of marble now gray and somber beneath the rain. JD's thoughts raced faster than the windshield wipers, each sweep clearing away water but not the weight of what had just transpired. He had said no, clear, final, irrevocable, and now there would be consequences. The road stretched ahead, empty and dark, but his phone's sudden vibration shattered the stillness. JD flinched, his heart already tuned to expect the worst. He glanced at the screen. No name, just a number he didn't recognize. The area code was familiar, local, but the call felt anything but friendly. He let it ring, let the voicemail pick it up. Moments later, the alert chimed, new voicemail. JD's thumb hovered over the icon. He knew he shouldn't check it while driving, but some part of him, the part that had spent years reading between the lines of power, couldn't wait. He pulled over beneath the skeletal branches of a leafless tree, its shape stark against the wash of city lights. The rain drummed steady on the roof as he played the message. A voice, low, unidentifiable. The tone flat, but the words sliced through the night like a knife. You've made your choice. Watch your back. That was all. No name, no explanation. Just a whisper in the dark. JD stared at the dashboard, the digits of the clock glowing dimly. The city, the night, even the rain seemed to be holding its breath. His heart pounded, not with fear exactly, not yet, but with the knowledge that lines had been crossed and there would be no turning back. Then another alert, a voicemail from a reporter he knew by name but had never spoken to. The voice was smoother, but no less ominous. Congressman Vance, I'm hearing some troubling things tonight. Rumors of a deal gone wrong. I'd like your comment before this goes public. Call me back. The storm, JD realized, was no longer a distant threat. It had found him, and it wasn't waiting. He leaned back, closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the rain. His mind replayed the balcony, Whitmer's smile, the envelope's weight, his mother's words. There was no regret, but there was a chill now, one that came from more than the cold. The first shots had been fired, quiet, unseen, but deadly all the same. JD shifted the car into gear, pulling back onto the road. The raindrops streaked faster now, and somewhere ahead, the storm awaited. No longer a metaphor, no longer a warning. It was here, and he would have to face it. The rain had stopped by dawn, but the storm had only just begun. As the first pale light of morning slipped between the blinds, JD Vance sat alone at the kitchen table, a mug of coffee gone cold in his hands. The house was still, the only sounds the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old floorboards. But outside, beyond these quiet walls, the world was already roaring. The headlines had hit. He didn't need to see the newspapers stacked on the porch to know what they said. His phone buzzed again and again. Texts, voicemails, news alerts piling on top of one another like waves against a weakening shore. But eventually, almost against his will, JD reached for the top paper, unfolded it with fingers that felt heavier than they should. Vance accused of taking bribe. The words screamed in bold type, the ink still fresh enough to smudge beneath his thumb. A grainy photo just beneath the headline showed him standing on that balcony, Whitmer at his side, the city lights behind them like a stage set for betrayal. Her face was turned slightly away, unreadable. His was caught mid-turn, eyes narrowed, lips parted as if speaking. A man in the act of sealing his own fate. Or so the story would want readers to believe. The article's first lines dripped with implication. Sources close to the matter allege that Congressman J.D. Vance was seen in private conversation with Governor Gretchen Whitmer during a high-profile gala last night, where discussions of a substantial financial offer may have taken place. Neither party has issued a statement at this time. J.D. set the paper down. The words burned into his mind whether he wanted them there or not. He rose, crossed the room, and turned on the small television tucked between cookbooks and a jar of worn wooden spoons. The morning shows had wasted no time. Is this the end of J.D. Vance's career? One host asked, brows arched, voice dripping both concern and delight. A man many saw as a rising star. Brought low by greed? Another chimed in, leaning forward, voice low as if sharing a secret with millions. Look at this photo, folks. Look at the body language. This isn't just a casual chat. This was a deal being struck. The screen shifted to another angle of the same balcony. One JD hadn't known was captured. The camera lens must have been long, hidden. the photo blurry but damning enough for those eager to believe. JD's gaze flicked toward the hallway, where soft sounds of cartoons drifted from the family room. His children were awake, oblivious for now. He closed his eyes, drawing a breath deep enough to steady hands that had begun to tremble, not with fear, but with the weight of what was coming. The phone rang again, a number he didn't recognize. He let it go. The voicemail icon blinked. He didn't listen. Not yet. Outside, the city was waking up, and with it, the machine that would grind this story into every home, every coffee shop, every workplace. He turned back to the table, to the headline that accused him, that would define him unless he fought back. And in that quiet kitchen, J.D. Vance understood. The storm wasn't waiting at the horizon anymore. It was at his door. The paper lay where J.D. had left it, headline bold against the morning light that now streamed through the kitchen window, indifferent to the storm it illuminated. The house felt quieter than it should have, as if the walls themselves were listening, waiting to see what he would do next. But the outside world wasn't waiting. His phone kept vibrating on the table, a relentless pulse of calls and messages. Friends, colleagues, strategists, all with advice he didn't want but knew he had to hear. By mid-morning, they began to arrive one by one. First was Martin, his chief of staff, face pale, tie crooked from the rush. Then came Sharon, the communications director, clutching a notepad filled with bullet points she never looked at because the panic was too raw in her eyes. A few others followed, voices urgent, overlapping, their words falling like blows. JD, you can't let this get ahead of us. You need to deny everything, firmly, publicly. People want to believe you. Give them a reason. Or at least, buy time. Let us spin this. There's no shame in protecting yourself. The kitchen felt smaller with every voice added to the mix, the walls seeming to press inward. JD stood at the counter, hands braced on the cool granite, listening, absorbing, feeling the weight of each suggestion like stones in his pockets. He knew they meant well, or most of them did, but beneath their words he heard it, fear, not just for him, but for themselves, for their careers, for the ship they were suddenly afraid might sink. And then came her voice, softer than theirs, but it cut deeper. JD. He turned. His wife stood in the doorway, her hair pulled back, eyes red from tears she hadn't wanted anyone to see. She didn't look at the team, didn't care that they were there. This was between them. I don't want to lose you, she said, voice breaking on the words. I don't want the kids to lose you. For a moment, everything else fell away. The advisors faded. The ringing phone went silent. Even the headlines seemed to blur at the edges. All that remained was the pain in her eyes and the crack in her voice that made his heart ache in ways no scandal ever could. He crossed to her, took her hands in his. You won't, he said, though he wasn't sure if it was promise or prayer. But as he glanced over her shoulder, he saw the looks exchanged between his team, glances that said more than their words. Doubt. Worry. The same kind of calculations he'd seen on the faces of men in boardrooms, weighing risk against reward, loyalty against survival. Even his allies were wavering. JD let out a slow breath, feeling the isolation settle deeper into his bones. The house wasn't just divided. He was. Between duty and safety, truth and strategy, the man he was and the man the world now expected him to become. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere in the distance, rising and falling like a warning carried on the wind. Inside, the air felt heavy, charged with a tension that no one dared name aloud. JD knew the next step would define not just his career, but the soul of everything he'd fought for. And for the first time, he wondered if he was truly ready for what was coming. The house had grown still again, but the storm outside its walls raged louder than ever. J.D. Vance stood at the window, the weight of his wife's tears still heavy on his heart, the voices of his team still echoing in his mind. The city beyond seemed almost peaceful in the afternoon light, but J.D. knew better. The real battle wasn't in the streets. It was playing out on screens, in headlines, in whispers that traveled faster than truth ever could. And now it was Whitmer's turn to strike. The television in the corner flickered as the press conference began. The network's graphic read, Governor Whitmer responds to scandal allegations. JD crossed the room, picked up the remote with fingers he forced to stay steady, and raised the volume. There she was. Gretchen Whitmer. Composed. Unflappable. She stood before the flags framed by the marble of the Capitol, a vision of dignity carefully crafted for the cameras. Her hair was perfectly in place, her expression measured. Just enough concern, just enough disappointment, no trace of the sharp edge JD had seen on the balcony that night. I want to begin by saying how deeply saddened I am that our nation has been distracted by these falsehoods, she began, her voice smooth as glass. At a time when we should be focused on serving the American people, we are instead forced to address baseless accusations designed to undermine the work we are doing for our communities. JD watched, the words washing over him like acid. She was good, better than he had given her credit for. Every sentence turned the knife, casting herself as the victim, casting him as the aggressor, the liar, the one desperate enough to invent a story for attention, for revenge, for whatever narrative would stick. I have always conducted myself with integrity, Whitmer continued, her eyes sweeping the room of reporters with practiced grace. I will not allow misinformation to distract from the work ahead. I have nothing to hide. I trust the American people to see through these attempts to sow division. A reporter called out, Governor, did you or did you not offer Congressman Vance money during the gala? Whitmer's smile was subtle, the kind that said she knew exactly how this game was played. Absolutely not, and I find it unfortunate that anyone would suggest otherwise without evidence. I wish Congressman Vance well. I hope he finds peace in these difficult times. JD felt the heat rise in his chest. He turned from the screen, his reflection catching in the darkened glass of the window. A man framed by storm clouds gathering beyond. For a heartbeat, doubt whispered, "This is too big. She's too powerful. The machine is too strong." But then, as if the storm inside him broke through the clouds, the doubt burned away, leaving only resolve. He spoke aloud, though no one else was in the room to hear it. "I will not go down quietly." The words tasted right, solid, true. JD turned back to the screen, watching Whitmer field more questions, each answer a master class in deflection and control. He wasn't naive. He knew what came next would be brutal. The machine would grind harder, the headlines would cut deeper, the whispers would grow louder. But he also knew this. If he stayed silent, if he let her rewrite the truth, it wouldn't just be his name that paid the price. It would be every voice that dared speak out and every truth that powerful hands tried to bury. And J.D. Vance had made his choice. The decision once made, J.D. Vance moved with a clarity that surprised even himself. The storm outside had broken, rain falling steady against the windows, as if the sky itself was listening. Inside, the house was a flurry of preparation. Calls made, statements drafted, a podium arranged. He barely heard his team as they moved around him. All his focus was on what needed to be done, what had to be done. By late afternoon, the press gathered in a room that felt too small for the weight of the moment. Cameras whirred, lights burned hot, and reporters leaned forward, pens poised and microphones angled like weapons, ready to capture every word, every slip, every tremor. The chatter before the broadcast was a low tide of speculation. Would he deny? Would he crumble? Would he fight? JD stood behind the podium, the envelope in his hand. It was the same one Whitmer had offered on that balcony, now creased from where his fingers had gripped it, smudged at the edges, but still heavy with all it symbolized. He waited for the signal, for the red light atop the main camera to glow. And when it did, the room hushed. The air itself seemed to tighten. He began without preamble. "Thank you for being here. I won't take much of your time. I know there's been a lot said in the past 24 hours. I know you've heard accusations, rumors, spin." His voice was steady, stronger than he felt inside. But that was as it needed to be. "But I'm not here to defend myself with words alone. I'm here to show you the truth." He lifted the envelope so that every lens could capture it, so that every viewer could see the thing that had started this firestorm. He held it high, not as evidence of guilt, but as a symbol of defiance. This, JD said, his voice firm, resonant in the tense silence, is what they thought would buy my silence. The words rang out, clean and unshakable. In living rooms, coffee shops, offices across the country, people paused. The image was powerful. A man refusing to be bought, holding the price of his integrity for all to see. A wave of disbelief, of awe, rippled through the nation. It wasn't what they'd expected. It wasn't the script they thought he'd follow. He set the envelope on the podium, resting his hand on it as if to anchor himself. I didn't take it. I didn't ask for it. I didn't want it. But someone wanted me to have it, to walk away, to stay quiet. And when I wouldn't, they tried something else. They tried to bury me under lies. He met the gaze of the cameras, of the room. I will not be buried. A murmur spread through the crowd, reporters exchanging glances, unsure if they were witnessing the end of a career or the birth of something far larger. JD continued, his tone unwavering. I will answer every question. I will face every inquiry, but I will not play by the rules of those who tried to silence me. The American people deserve the truth, and that is what I intend to give them. For a beat, the room held its breath. Then the questions came, shouted, urgent. But JD didn't flinch. The storm was here, but he was no longer bracing against it. He was stepping into it. And across the country, millions watched, wondering where this would lead, and sensing, perhaps for the first time, that the real battle had only just begun. The press conference had ended, but the storm did not. If anything, JD Vance's stand before the cameras had only fed the winds. That night, the threats began to pour in, first as faceless messages in his inbox, then as voicemails thick with menace, words that dripped with hatred, with the fury of those who saw his refusal not as courage, but as betrayal. And then came the brick. It shattered the front window just after midnight, the crash loud enough to wake the children. JD was first to the room, glass crunching beneath his shoes as he stepped through. His wife stood behind him, pulling the kids close, her face pale but resolute. The brick lay amid the shards, a crude note tied around it in smudged marker. Shut up or else. JD stared at it, the words burning brighter than the jagged edges of glass that littered the floor. Outside, the street was empty, the night holding its secrets in shadows and silence. He stepped back, heart heavy with the weight of what his choice had brought to his doorstep. By morning, allies who'd once stood close began to drift away. Calls went unanswered. Messages were met with polite but hollow assurances. We're reviewing our position. We need to let this play out. The warmth of solidarity faded, leaving JD with only the cold echo of his own determination. Even those who had once urged him to speak up now seemed to shrink from the storm he'd invited. And so the nights grew long. JD took to walking beneath the weight of the dark sky, his footsteps lonely on the rain-slick sidewalks. The city that had once felt familiar now felt foreign, as if every lighted window might be watching, judging. He passed shuttered shops, empty benches, the quiet hum of street lamps. All of it a reminder of how small one man could feel against the machinery of power and perception. Was he right to speak? Had he done what he'd sworn never to do? Ruin everything for the sake of principle? And yet, as doubt gnawed at him, memory rose unbidden. The plant gates loomed in his mind's eye, rusty and tall, the smell of oil and metal thick in the air. He saw his father's back as he walked away for the last time. Shoulders square, head high, boots worn thin but dignity intact. JD had been just a boy then, watching from the passenger seat of a battered pickup as the plant disappeared behind them, the place that had fed them, clothed them, now just another carcass left by the wolves of profit. His father hadn't spoken that day. He hadn't needed to. The silence had said everything. You don't always win, but you don't let them see you broken. JD stopped beneath a flickering streetlight, the night air sharp in his lungs. He looked up at the sky, clouds drifting past a sliver of moon. The threats, the silence of friends, the brick through the window. They were all meant to break him, to make him regret. And maybe he did in fleeting moments. But beneath the regret lived something stronger. Resolve, forged long ago in a boy's memory. of a man who'd lost everything but his pride. The storm was far from over, but JD knew now. He would walk through it, no matter how long the night. The nights remained heavy, the storm far from over, but as dawn broke over another day of uncertainty, something shifted. It began with a single letter, a plain envelope, no return address, the handwriting uneven, as if penned by someone not used to writing, but compelled to speak. JD had expected more threats, more condemnation, but as he opened it at the kitchen table, what he found inside stopped him cold. Congressman Vance, the note began, I don't know if you'll ever see this. I don't know if it'll matter, but I need to say it. I'm just a guy who works at the mill, or did until last week. They're shutting us down, shipping what's left of our work overseas. I sat at my kitchen table last night thinking it was over. Then I saw you on the news. You gave me hope when I thought we had none. The words were simple, scratched out in ink that smudged in places, but they carried a weight JD hadn't expected. He read the letter twice, 3 times, as if afraid the meaning would vanish between readings. The writer didn't ask for favors, didn't plead for promises. He simply offered gratitude, and, in doing so, reminded JD why he had stood his ground in the first place. More letters followed, some typed, others handwritten on lined notebook paper or the backs of receipts. A teacher in Ohio who'd faced budget cuts and felt invisible. A small-town mayor who'd lost re-election after refusing a developer's bribe. A single mother juggling 2 jobs who wrote, My kids asked why you were in trouble. I told them because you told the truth. Each message felt like a hand on his shoulder, steadying him, reminding him he wasn't as alone as the silence of his allies had made him feel. The storm outside still raged. The headlines still questioned. The threats still came. But inside JD's heart, the first glimmer of something stronger than fear began to take root. He stood at the window, watching the early morning light catch on the shards of glass still waiting to be swept from the porch. The scar from the brick still fresh. His reflection stared back, tired but resolute. I won't let them down, JD said aloud, his voice quiet but firm, as if making a promise not just to himself, but to every person who'd taken the time to write. The storm hadn't passed. The fight was far from over. But in the letters from strangers, from ordinary Americans who had nothing to gain by reaching out, JD found the strength to face whatever came next. Because now he wasn't just standing for himself. He was standing for them, for their voices, for their hopes that someone, somewhere, would refuse to be bought or broken. And as the sun climbed higher, burning through the clouds, JD felt the first warmth of resolve renewed. A small light against the darkness, but growing stronger with each new day. The letters kept arriving, each one a small reminder that JD Vance's stand had meant something to someone. But even as they gave him strength, the storm outside his door darkened. Whitmer's team had been silent for days, too silent. And then, without warning, they struck. It started with a leaked memo. A document bearing JD's letterhead, littered with language suggesting deals he'd never proposed, promises he'd never made. By the time his team saw it, the memo had already made the rounds on cable news, its phrases dissected and debated by talking heads eager for the next twist in the saga. JD's face filled the screens, side by side with highlighted lines from the document that painted him as the very thing he'd fought against. Another politician for sale. He barely had time to process the blow when the recordings surfaced. Chopped, edited, spliced so carefully that only those who knew the full conversations could spot what was missing. His voice, stripped of context, made to sound complicit, calculating. The words weren't false, but the way they'd been arranged turned truth into weapon. JD sat in his office, the blinds drawn against the bright afternoon sun that now felt harsh, accusing. His team gathered around, their faces pale, their energy brittle. Sharon, his communications director, clicked between news sites, each headline worse than the last. JD Vance, integrity or illusion? Hero or hypocrite? The congressman's words under new scrutiny. Edited or exposed? Recordings raise fresh questions. It's working, Martin said quietly, leaning against the doorframe. They're shifting the narrative. People are starting to doubt. JD didn't answer at first. He stared at the screen where his image played on loop, where pundits who'd praised his courage days before now raised eyebrows and asked if the public had been too quick to rally behind him. He felt the walls closing in, the careful foundation he'd tried to build cracking beneath the weight of manufactured scandal. Outside, reporters had begun to gather again at the end of the driveway, cameras aimed at the house like rifles waiting to fire. The phone rang nonstop, each call another demand for a comment, for clarification, for an explanation he knew wouldn't satisfy a machine hungry for spectacle. "I didn't say those things," JD said at last, his voice low, steady despite the storm in his chest. "We know that," Sharon replied, but even she sounded like she was trying to convince herself. JD rose, moved to the window, parted the blinds with 2 fingers. The world beyond felt hostile now, every glance a judgment, every shadow a threat. He'd known they would fight dirty, but he hadn't expected how fast the tide could turn, how easily doubt could be planted and grown. For the first time, the thought crossed his mind. What if they win? What if all I've done ends in ruin anyway? But as quickly as the thought came, he pushed it aside. The smear was meant to break him, to corner him, to make him retreat. And though the walls felt closer now, though the air felt thinner, JD knew surrender wasn't an option. Not for himself, not for the voices that had written, hoping he'd stay standing. The smear campaign hadn't finished its work, but it had done enough damage to fuel what came next. The letter arrived not by email or phone call, but by official courier. Heavy cardstock stamped with the seal of Congress, as cold and impersonal as the judgment it carried. J.D. Vance unfolded it at his desk, the words as expected as they were weighty. "The House Committee on Ethics hereby summons you to appear." There was no pretense left. The storm had gathered its full force, and now it demanded his presence at its center. The hearing was set for a week's time. Enough days for his enemies to sharpen their lines of attack. Not enough for him to repair the damage already done. J.D. set the letter down, its edges crisp against his fingertips. Outside his office, the house felt too quiet, the hum of the city beyond its windows too distant. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Martin, his chief of staff, standing in the doorway. The man looked tired, his shirt sleeves rolled up, dark circles beneath his eyes. "They're sharpening their knives, J.D., Martin said softly. "No need for preamble. And they'll come at you with all of them at once." J.D. offered a faint smile, though there was no humor in it. "I never expected they'd send flowers." But as the weight of what lay ahead settled on him, J.D. felt the need for space, for quiet. He excused himself from the flurry of strategy sessions, stepped away from the ringing phones and the endless drafts of statements that would never satisfy those who'd already chosen their narrative. He needed to hear a voice that no longer spoke, but had always steadied him. The cemetery lay on the edge of town, a place of old trees and older stones. J.D. parked at the far end and walked the gravel path alone, the autumn wind tugging at his coat, carrying the faint scent of fallen leaves and distant rain. He found her grave easily. He always did. The simple headstone marked only with her name, the dates of a life too short, and the words she had once spoken in a kitchen dark with worry. "Don't ever let anyone put a price on your voice." J.D. crouched, brushing fallen leaves from the base of the stone, his fingers tracing the carved letters as if they could bring her closer. The noise of the world faded. The storm beyond these gates momentarily kept at bay. "I'm trying, Mom," he said quietly, voice nearly lost to the wind. "I'm trying to do it right. But they're coming at me with everything, and I don't know how this ends." He stayed there, the minutes slipping by unnoticed, until the sky grew heavy with clouds and the first drops of rain began to fall. Rising, J.D. felt the chill seep through his coat, but inside the cold gave way to resolve. His mother's voice, her strength, lived in him still. The storm would not break him. By the time he returned to the car, the plan was clear in his mind. The hearing loomed like a mountain, but he would climb it. Not to save his name alone, but to defend the truth. For himself, for those who still believed, and for the memory of the woman who had taught him what integrity truly meant. The rain had settled into a steady rhythm by the time J.D. returned home, its soft patter against the windows filling the silence that his thoughts left behind. The letter from Congress sat on the kitchen table where he'd left it, the official seal catching the dim light of the room. He'd thought the worst was behind him, that the next step was the hearing itself, where he would face whatever storm waited on that floor. But power, he was learning, rarely gave up so easily. The knock came just as night fell, a soft but deliberate sound at the front door. J.D. opened it to find a man he recognized, though they'd never spoken directly. Dressed in an expensive coat, his shoes polished despite the rain, the man exuded the quiet confidence of someone used to carrying messages no one wanted to hear. His eyes were calm, almost kind, but J.D. saw the steel beneath. "May I come in?" the man asked, his tone polite, almost apologetic. J.D. didn't answer. He stepped aside and the messenger entered, pausing just inside as if he understood the weight of crossing that threshold. He didn't sit, didn't remove his coat. He simply spoke. "There's still a way out of this," he said quietly. "No headlines, no hearing, no more bricks through your window. All it takes is silence." J.D. stared at him, letting the words settle, their meaning as clear as if they'd been carved in stone. The man continued, his voice steady, as if delivering a final generous offer. "Withdraw from the spotlight. Let the committee do its work without spectacle. Step aside quietly and this ends. No more damage to your family, no more danger to yourself. It's not weakness, it's wisdom." For a long moment, the only sound was the rain and the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the ordinary sounds of an ordinary life that felt farther away with each passing day. J.D. felt the weight of the offer, as heavy in its own way as the envelope Whitmer had once held out on that balcony. A different kind of bribe, cloaked in reason instead of cash. But as he stood there, something older stirred in him, deeper than fear or weariness. The memory of his father's silence, not the quiet strength of a man standing tall, but the defeated hush of someone who'd been made voiceless by forces that never showed their faces. J.D. saw the factory gates again, saw the boots worn thin by labor unvalued, saw the way his father's shoulders had sagged that last day when no words had been enough to change what was done. Silence is what took my father's job, J.D. thought, the realization sharp and steady. I won't give it more victims. His voice, when it came, was soft but unyielding. Thank you for your time, but I won't be silent. The messenger regarded him for a beat, no anger in his eyes, only acceptance, as if J.D.'s answer had been written long before the question was asked. He gave a small nod, turned, and let himself out, leaving the door to close softly behind him. J.D. stood alone, the storm outside mirrored by the one within, but his course set. The breaking point had come, and he had not broken. By dawn, J.D. Vance's quiet refusal had become a roar heard across the nation. The man had turned down not just money, not just threats, but the final olive branch from those who believed every soul could be bargained for. And in doing so, he had struck a nerve deeper than even he had imagined. The protests began small, scattered clusters outside courthouses, at city squares, in front of television stations. But by nightfall, they swelled like rivers fed by storm. The streets filled with voices, some shouting his name in defiance of the system, others cursing him as the fool who'd risked stability for the sake of pride. Banners waved above the crowds. J.D. stands for us beside traitor in a suit. Car horns blared in rhythm with chants. The air itself seemed charged, thick with the weight of a country unsure of itself. In living rooms, families argued across dinner tables. Fathers who'd once worked the lines but lost their pensions saw in J.D. a man who remembered what they had endured. Sons and daughters who'd grown cynical from endless scandals saw another politician courting ruin. The same names, the same facts, but two Americas staring at each other over plates gone cold. J.D. watched it unfold from his office window, the city below glowing with the lights of news crews, the flicker of protest signs, the flash of police escorts struggling to keep order. He heard the low rumble of chants carried on the night air. He didn't feel triumph. He felt the weight of what had been unleashed. The news anchors tried to capture it, but even their practiced voices faltered. One veteran broadcaster, known for never showing more than a flicker of emotion, paused mid-sentence during a live segment, the tremor in his voice betraying what the camera tried to conceal. This isn't just a political scandal anymore, he said softly, almost to himself. This is something more. His co-anchor, eyes wide, nodded but found no words. Across the country, the lines of division cut deeper. Social media feeds filled with dueling images. JD's face imposed over the flag. JD's face crossed out in red. Friends unfriended. Neighbors stopped waving. Churches hosted prayer circles, some for JD's safety, some for his defeat. The storm had spilled beyond Washington, beyond JD's doorstep, into the veins of the nation. But through it all, JD remained steady, or tried to. He met with his team, listened to their strategies, their warnings, but said little. He knew the hearing loomed like a mountain waiting to be climbed. He knew the protests would only grow louder as the day approached. But beneath it all, he carried the memory of his father's boots, his mother's grave, the letters from strangers who'd written in the dark, hoping someone, anyone, would still stand. Outside, sirens wailed, mingling with the chants, the drums, the clash of voices. America was on fire, not with flames, but with fury, with fear, with a desperate hunger for answers that no soundbite could satisfy. And J.D. Vance, standing at the center of it all, understood what came next. The storm wasn't his alone anymore. It belonged to the nation, and it was far from over. The chants outside his window had become a constant backdrop to J.D. Vance's every moment. Some chanted his name as a hero. Others shouted it as if it were a curse. The streets no longer belonged to quiet pedestrians or families heading home. They belonged to the storm, a nation's anger and hope, tangled together so tightly that no one could tell where one ended and the other began. JD knew he couldn't stay silent amid that storm, not anymore. The decision came quietly, made not in some war room of strategists, but alone, in the dim light of his study, with the hum of the city beyond the glass. He would speak, not at a press conference, not with sound bites fed to hungry reporters, but directly to the people, without filter, without spin. His team had resisted at first, their voices anxious. Too risky. What if they twist your words? What if it backfires? But JD had only shaken his head. The time for caution had passed. And so, on a night when the nation held its breath, JD Vance took the podium before the cameras. The networks cleared their primetime slots. No one wanted to miss what might be the speech that made or broke him. Living rooms across America glowed with the light of television screens. Families gathered, some in support, some in suspicion, as JD looked into the lens, not as a politician, but as a man who had nothing left to lose but his voice. "I didn't come here tonight to ask for your forgiveness," JD began, his voice steady but not rehearsed. "And I'm not here to plead my case to those who've already made up their minds. I'm here to speak to those who still believe that truth matters, that a man's word means something, even when the world tries to drown it out." He paused, letting the weight of that truth fill the silence. "I won't tell you this has been easy. I won't tell you I haven't felt fear. But I will tell you this. If I fall, let it be standing with the people who placed their trust in me. Let it be standing for the men and women who sent me letters in the night, who held signs in the rain, who taught their children that courage is worth more than comfort." JD's words cut through the noise like a bell in fog. The nation listened, some with tears in their eyes, others with arms crossed, waiting for the slip, the weakness, the angle they could attack. But what they heard instead was sincerity, raw and unguarded. "I didn't choose this fight, but I won't run from it. And I won't be silent, because silence is what let good men be broken, good families be forgotten, good jobs be stolen. I speak tonight because too many have been told to hush for too long, and I will not join them in that silence." In studios, anchors struggled to maintain composure. One veteran journalist, long accused of cynicism, wiped at the corner of his eye, pretending it was a cough. Across dinner tables, families stopped arguing for a moment, listening not to the JD they'd seen in headlines, but to the JD they saw now. A man flawed, embattled, but standing. When JD finished, he left the podium without waiting for applause, without waiting for the spin. The cameras stayed on the empty stage, as if unsure what to do without him there. Outside, the storm still raged, but inside millions of homes, something quieter, stronger had taken root. The echo of a voice that refused to be silenced. The echo of J.D. Vance's live speech still lingered across the airwaves, its final words replayed by networks, dissected by pundits, debated in living rooms. But even before the applause had fully faded, the next wave of the storm broke. The world had watched, but not all who watched had watched with hope, and not all who once stood beside him would remain. The first betrayal came quietly. A longtime colleague, someone J.D. had once called a friend, released a statement to the press. Carefully worded, polished, but cutting all the same. While I respect Congressman Vance's right to defend his position, I cannot in good conscience align myself with his approach. The integrity of the institution must come first. Others followed, their words different but their meaning the same. Distance, disavowal, the careful drawing of lines between themselves and a man they'd once toasted at dinners, strategized with behind closed doors, leaned on in moments of political need. J.D. read each statement as they appeared, one after the other, the names familiar, the wounds fresh. He'd expected enemies to attack, but it was the retreat of friends that stung deepest. Each disavowal felt like another brick in a wall rising around him, a wall meant to isolate, to contain, to crush. And yet, just as quickly as the betrayals came, so too did the unexpected voices of the faithful. The first call that morning wasn't from a reporter or a strategist. It was from an elderly veteran in Kansas. The man's voice cracked with age but held firm. "Son, I don't know much about politics anymore, but I know what standing tall looks like, and that's what you did. You don't forget that." Then came the letters. Dozens at first, then hundreds, then boxes arriving at his office so quickly his staff had to clear a room to hold them all. Handwritten notes on lined paper, postcards from small towns, printed emails folded and tucked into envelopes. A mother from Pennsylvania who wrote, "My boy saw you speak. He said he wants to be brave like you. That means something, sir. That means everything." A factory foreman from Michigan, his words scrawled in pencil on a scrap torn from a shipping box. "You're fighting for us. We see it. Don't stop." A teacher from New Mexico, a preacher from Georgia, a waitress from Indiana who sent her tip money in small bills with a note. "It ain't much, but it's what I have to give. Don't let them win." J.D. sat late into the night reading them, one after the other, his heart heavy with the knowledge of the cost, but steadied by the realization that he did not stand alone. The faces in Congress might turn from him, the headlines might twist his words, but out there, in places far from the cameras, beyond the marble halls, people were watching, people were hoping, people were with him. And as the pile of letters grew, so too did his resolve. The storm still raged, the hearing still loomed. But J.D. Vance understood now that the fight was no longer just his own. It belonged to all who'd written, all who believed, all who refused to be silent. And that, he thought as dawn broke on another day, was worth every cost. The chamber felt colder than J.D. Vance had imagined it would. The vaulted ceiling, the polished wood, the flags standing sentinel behind the dais, all designed to project dignity, but in this moment, they felt more like the walls of a battleground. The air crackled with anticipation, thick with the hum of whispered speculation, the click of cameras being adjusted, the scratch of pens ready to capture every word. The storm had brought him here, and now at last it would have its reckoning. J.D. sat at the witness table, the bright lights of the cameras hot on his face. To his left and right, his counsel and staff sat in tense silence, but J.D. barely noticed them. His eyes were fixed on one figure across the room, Governor Gretchen Whitmer. She sat poised, polished as ever, the faintest smile touching her lips, as if she already knew the outcome and merely waited for the formalities to play out. Their gazes met, and for a heartbeat, J.D. saw not the polished exterior, but the calculation beneath. This was her stage as much as his. The chairman gavelled the hearing into session, his voice echoing in the chamber, calling the proceedings to order. The first senator leaned into the microphone, his tone courteous but sharp, like a blade wrapped in velvet. "Congressman Vance," the senator began, You have presented yourself to this committee as a man of integrity, and yet the evidence before us raises troubling questions. Are you prepared to explain why the governor of a great state would accuse you of misconduct? JD folded his hands on the table, his voice steady as he met the senator's gaze. I am prepared to explain, Senator, and I welcome the opportunity to speak plainly before the American people. A ripple moved through the room. Reporters scribbled faster, cameras zoomed in closer. The senator raised an eyebrow, perhaps unused to so direct a reply. Another senator took up the charge, her voice firmer, the edge of frustration clear. Mr. Vance, let's be clear. You stand accused of fabricating allegations, of undermining public trust for political gain. Why should this committee, why should the American people believe your version of events? JD drew a slow breath, felt the storm within him steady. His voice, when it came, carried not defiance, but something stronger, the weight of hard truth. Because I have nothing to gain by lying, because I have stood to lose everything, and still chose to speak, because silence is what lets corruption thrive, and because the only thing I offer this committee today is the truth, plain and unvarnished. His words hung in the air, unshaken by the tension that followed. The senators exchanged glances. They had expected evasions, denials, perhaps outrage. Instead, JD met their questions with a calm that refused to yield. They pressed on, their inquiries growing sharper, their voices louder, but JD did not flinch. He answered each point with clarity, drawing on memory, on evidence, on the simple facts of what had occurred that night on the balcony. As the hearing stretched into its second hour, the mood in the chamber shifted. The cameras kept rolling, broadcasting every word, every glance, every flicker of uncertainty on the faces of those who had come to break him. JD's voice remained sure, not because he was certain of victory, but because he was certain of his purpose. And across the nation, in homes and offices and town halls, people watched, not the fall of a man, but the fight of one who had refused to be bought, who now refused to be broken. The hours had worn on, the chamber thick with tension that no amount of formal decorum could disguise. The senators had fired their questions, some sharp as knives, others veiled in civility, but all aimed at one thing, to test the steel of J.D. Vance's resolve. And through it all, J.D. had stood firm, his voice even, his answers measured, his truth unwavering. Yet he knew that words alone would never be enough. The storm demanded more, and now the time had come to give it. J.D. reached beneath the table and drew out a slim folder, his fingers steady despite the pounding of his heart. He set it before him, opened it with care, and withdrew a small device. The kind used for recording, unobtrusive, forgotten by most in the noise of a crowded gala, but invaluable in the quiet of truth's defense. He looked up, his gaze sweeping the chamber, meeting the eyes of senators, reporters, the watching nation through the unblinking lenses of the cameras. And then at last his eyes met Whitmer's. Her smile still held, but it had tightened, the confidence behind it strained. I have spoken to you of truth, J.D. began, his voice carrying not defiance now, but purpose. And now I will let the truth speak for itself. He pressed a button, and the chamber filled with the unmistakable sound of that night's conversation. Whitmer's voice, smooth as silk, but clear, undeniable. This is just between us. 10 million, J.D. Think about your family. The words echoed through the room, followed by a silence so complete it seemed the chamber itself held its breath. The senators froze, their questions forgotten. The reporters' pens hovered above paper, suspended mid-sentence. Even the cameras seemed to lean in, as if technology itself strained to capture the moment. Gasps rose from the gallery, from the staffers lining the walls, from those who had come expecting spectacle, but found themselves witness to revelation. J.D. watched as Whitmer's composure faltered, the practiced mask slipping just enough to reveal the storm beneath. Her eyes narrowed, her jaw clenched, not in shock but in calculation, as if already spinning the next offense, the next distraction. But there was no distraction strong enough to erase what the room had heard. No spin fast enough to unwind the simple, damning clarity of her offer. The storm she had helped unleash had turned, and now its fury bore down on her. JD let the recording play to its end, then turned it off, the silence that followed louder than any protest could have been. He looked again at those who had come to judge him, his voice steady as he spoke. I did not come here to tear down a colleague. I came here to defend the truth, and I trust the American people to see it for what it is. And with that, the room, the nation, and the storm itself seemed to shift, the balance of power tilting, the tide turning. J.D. Vance had done more than survive the storm. In that moment, he had seized it. The weight of the storm seemed to hang suspended in the seconds after J.D. Vance silenced the recording. The chamber, moments ago alive with tension, now sat in stunned quiet, as if no one dared move, breathe, or speak. The senators exchanged glances, some wide-eyed with shock, others tight-lipped as the balance of power shifted before them. Cameras captured every flicker of emotion, every beat of sweat, every tremor of hands that had moments earlier held their questions like weapons. And then at last the gavel fell. The chairman's voice measured but unmistakably changed. The committee finds no grounds to pursue further action against Congressman Vance. This hearing is adjourned. No applause followed. Not here. Not in the solemnity of the chamber where dignity demanded restraint. But the meaning of those words rolled through the room like thunder. J.D. sat still for a moment, the echoes of the gavel seeming louder than the storm itself. He had stood his ground, spoken his truth, and the truth had stood with him. Across the room, Whitmer gathered her papers with hands that no longer moved with the easy confidence they once had. Her allies, who had moments before flanked her with unwavering loyalty, now found excuses to busy themselves, their gazes downcast, their alliances shifting as swiftly as the wind changes course. The storm she had helped fuel had turned on her, and they knew it. J.D. rose slowly, his knees unsteady not from fear, but from the weight of all that had led to this moment. The cameras followed his every move, but he no longer felt them. His heart raced, his breath came deep, but steady, and as he stepped from the chamber into the brightness of day, the sound that greeted him was like nothing he'd expected. A roar, a chant, a wave of voices that filled the air, powerful and pure. J.D., J.D., J.D. The crowd outside was vast, far larger than the protests, larger than the jeers that had once haunted his nights. They held signs, they waved flags, but mostly they lifted their voices, carrying him on a tide of sound that spoke of relief, of pride, of shared vindication. J.D. blinked against the sun, against the tears that welled despite himself. He let them fall unashamed. Tears of relief, of exhaustion so deep it ached in his bones, of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, this stand had meant something beyond survival. He looked out at the faces, young and old, weary and joyful, strangers who had become his strength, and felt the storm begin, at last, to break. The storm was not over. The fight for truth never truly ends. But in that moment, J.D. Vance knew he had weathered it, not alone, but with the countless voices that had refused to be silent, and together they had prevailed. The dawn broke over the town with a warmth that felt new, as if the sun itself rose brighter in celebration of what had been reclaimed. J.D. Vance stood at the edge of the factory grounds, the scent of oil and steel sharp in the air, mingling with the breeze that carried the hum of machinery long silent. The plant had reopened. Where once the gates had rusted shut and the windows had gathered dust, now there was life. Workers arriving in the early light, voices calling to one another, the clang of tools, the steady rhythm of industry reborn. J.D. walked through the wide doors, his boots echoing on the concrete floor, past the massive presses and conveyor belts that had been stilled for too long. Men and women lifted their heads as he passed, offering nods, smiles, handshakes. Some clapped him on the shoulder, others simply met his eyes with quiet thanks. J.D. said little. He didn't need to. The work spoke for itself. The factory's heart beat louder than any speech he might give. Then from between two machines, a small figure darted forward. A boy no older than 8 or 9, his hair tousled, his eyes bright with the kind of joy that only comes from seeing a parent restored to purpose. He ran to JD, breathless, and tugged at his sleeve. "You saved my dad's job," the boy said, voice high, words rushed with excitement and gratitude that needed no polish. JD knelt so they were eye to eye, the smell of machine oil and metal all around them. He smiled, though his throat felt tight. "No, son," he said quietly. "Your dad and all these folks, they saved it. I just didn't let anyone take it away." The boy grinned, then ran back to where a man stood watching, a father with grease on his hands and tears in his eyes. JD straightened, took in the sight of the factory alive again, and felt a peace he hadn't known in months. This was the reward no money could buy. The story of JD Vance didn't end with the closing of a hearing or the reopening of a factory. It lived on, carried by voices across the country, retold at dinner tables where families debated courage and conscience. Talk radio hosts replayed the moment he lifted that envelope before the cameras, callers arguing whether such defiance had strengthened or endangered the nation's fragile trust. Editorials filled columns with words like integrity, sacrifice, honor, terms too rarely attached to the names of public figures, and now, finally, spoken with sincerity. In schools, civics teachers adjusted lesson plans to include his stand. Students watched the recordings, read the transcripts, and wrestled with what it meant to speak truth when silence would be safer. In small towns and cities, parents pointed to JD's example when teaching their children that doing right often came at a price, but that some prices were worth paying. On television retrospectives, anchors who had once doubted him now spoke with voices touched by respect. The nation reflected, not because JD had been perfect, but because he had been human, flawed, and yet unbending when it mattered most. His choice had rippled outward, reminding Americans of who they still could be. In the quiet of his study, JD stood before the glass case he had commissioned, simple, unadorned, save for the object it held, the envelope. The same envelope Whitmer had offered, once heavy with its unspoken promise, now empty but heavier than ever with meaning. Beneath it, a small brass plaque bore the words he had chosen. The price of silence. Refused. He traced the edge of the case with his fingertips, remembering the night air on the balcony, the weight of that choice, the storm that had followed. Outside his window, the world moved on. Children playing in yards, factory whistles calling shifts to begin, the hum of a country forever imperfect, forever striving. JD let out a slow breath, feeling the weight of the journey settle into a quiet corner of his heart. The cameras were gone. The chance had faded, but what remained was enough. "They offered me everything to betray the people," JD said softly, his voice meant for no one but himself. "I chose the people instead, and that will always be enough." And with that, he turned from the case, the storm behind him, the future ahead. In a world where power and wealth often speak louder than principles, JD Vance's story reminds us that true strength lies in standing firm for what is right, even when the cost is high. His refusal to trade integrity for comfort and his choice to face the storm rather than silence his voice reflect a courage we all hope to find within ourselves. This is not just a tale about politics. It is about the power of one person's conscience to spark change, to inspire others, and to remind us that integrity is the reward money can't buy. JD's journey encourages us to look beyond fear, beyond pressure, and to choose the harder path when it is the right one. What about you? When have you faced a moment where doing the right thing came with a price? And what did you choose? Let's share, reflect, and inspire one another. If this story touches you, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to JD Stories, where every voice matters and every story echoes far beyond the screen. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, it includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching JD Stories.